Close your eyes and imagine a battlefield where the ground itself has been transformed into something alien, where weeks of artillery bombardment have turned soil into moonscape, where the trees that once covered the cliffs of Okinawa have been reduced to charred splinters, and the vegetation has been burned away, leaving only rock and mud and the smell of cordite and death. May 1945. The war in the Pacific is entering its final months, but the Japanese are not surrendering, are instead defending every island with fanatical determination that turns each advance into a grinding attrition of American lives measured in yards gained and casualties sustained. Okinawa is the last major island before mainland Japan, and everyone understands that taking it will cost thousands of lives, that the fighting will be brutal in ways that exceed even the horror of Iwo Jima and Peleliu. Your name is Desmond Doss. You are 26 years old, a private first class in the 77th Infantry Division, and you are climbing the Maeda Escarpment, a 400-foot cliff face that the Japanese have fortified with machine gun nests and artillery positions and interconnected tunnel systems that allow them to appear and disappear like ghosts, to pour fire down on American troops trying to scale the heights and establish a foothold on ground the enemy has spent months preparing to defend. You are climbing this cliff without a weapon, not because you lost your rifle or because your unit ran out of equipment, but because you refuse to carry one, refuse to kill even in war, refuse to compromise the religious conviction that has governed your entire life, despite the mockery and the threats and the court-martial proceedings that nearly ended your military career before it began. You are a Seventh-day Adventist, raised in Virginia by parents who taught you the Ten Commandments with a literalism that left no room for interpretation or situational ethics. Thou shalt not kill means exactly what it says, not thou shalt not murder, which might allow for killing in war, not thou shalt not kill except when your nation demands it, but simply, absolutely, thou shalt not kill. This belief is not abstract theology for you. It is lived reality, the foundation of every decision you make, the non-negotiable core of your identity. When you were drafted in 1942, you registered as conscientious objector, but specified you would serve as combat medic, would go wherever soldiers went and face whatever dangers they faced, would simply not carry a weapon or participate in the killing, even if that meant dying unarmed while others fought. The Army did not understand this distinction. They saw refusal to carry a weapon as cowardice, as shirking duty, as the worst kind of betrayal when American men were dying on islands across the Pacific. Your fellow soldiers in basic training tormented you, stole your Bible, threw your boots out windows, beat you when the drill sergeants were not watching, called you coward and traitor and worse. Your commanding officers tried to discharge you on psychiatric grounds, argued that religious conviction this absolute must be mental illness, that no sane man would go into combat without means to defend himself. You faced court-martial for refusing direct orders to carry a rifle, but somehow, through intervention of officers who recognized sincerity, if not sense, through military bureaucracy's occasional acknowledgement that regulations must accommodate unusual cases, you survived the attempts to remove you and were allowed to serve as medic with the explicit understanding that you would carry no weapon, would serve in combat relying on faith and first aid training rather than firepower. Your unit despises you. They see you as a liability, as dead weight. as the medic who will probably run when the shooting starts, because a man who refuses to kill obviously lacks courage to face danger. They do not trust you. They do not want you in their platoon, and they have told you directly that when combat begins, they will not risk themselves to save you if you get hit, that refusing to carry a weapon means accepting the consequences of that choice, including bleeding out while your fellow soldiers prioritize saving men who actually contributed to the fighting. The assault on Maida Escarpment begins on April 29, 1945. Your battalion scales the cliff using cargo nets and rope ladders, climbing 400 feet while Japanese defenders pour machine gun fire and grenades down on the ascending Americans, picking off soldiers who lose their grip or pause too long in exposed positions. You climb with your medical bag and your faith, hauling yourself up the cliff face while bullets snap past and men fall screaming into the rocks below, their bodies broken by impact or torn apart by fire before they hit the ground. You reach the top somehow, impossibly, pull yourself over the edge onto the plateau where the fighting immediately intensifies, where Japanese positions hidden in the rubble open fire at point-blank range, and Americans dive for cover behind anything that might stop bullets. The battle dissolves into chaos. Coordinated assault becomes desperate survival as Japanese counterattacks push American forces back, as artillery shells drop indiscriminately and the plateau becomes a killing ground where visibility is measured in feet and distinguishing friend from enemy requires split-second decisions that determine who lives and who dies. Men are hit everywhere. Machine gun fire, grenade fragments, artillery shrapnel turning bodies into injuries that require immediate treatment, or the wounded bleed out in minutes. And you are moving through this hell, unarmed, crawling from position to position, treating wounds while bullets crack overhead, dragging injured soldiers to cover while mortars explode close enough to shower you with rocks and dirt. Your unit is taking catastrophic casualties. The fighting is too intense, the Japanese resistance too determined, the American foothold too precarious. The order comes to retreat, to abandon the plateau and withdraw back down the cliff, to consolidate at the base and regroup for another attempt tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever command decides they can afford to throw more men at this objective. The withdrawal begins in chaos, soldiers scrambling back to the cliff edge, descending the cargo nets as quickly as possible, while Japanese fire intensifies, sensing victory, sensing that the Americans are broken and vulnerable. But wounded men remain on the plateau, dozens of them, men too injured to move on their own, men unconscious from blood loss or trauma, men who will be killed or captured if they are left behind when the battalion withdraws. The other soldiers are descending the cliff, following orders, prioritizing survival over rescue, because that is what combat sometimes demands, what the brutal mathematics of war requires. But you are not descending. You are moving through the plateau, collecting wounded, dragging them to the cliff edge one by one, lowering them down using the rope system intended for equipment, then crawling back into the fire to find another casualty, another man who will die if you do not reach him, another life that depends entirely on whether you can move fast enough and survive long enough to complete the rescue. The Japanese are advancing, clearing the plateau methodically, killing any Americans they find. You can hear them moving through the rubble, can hear the sporadic gunfire as they execute wounded who cannot resist, and you are working faster now, desperate, knowing that every minute you remain on the plateau increases the probability that you will be killed or captured, that your refusal to carry a weapon means you cannot defend yourself, cannot fight back, can only hide and move and pray that you remain undetected long enough to save one more man, then another, then another. The night stretches into eternity, each rescue feeling like it might be the last, each trip back into the plateau feeling like suicide.
The rope system becomes your entire universe, a lifeline connecting the plateau to safety 400 feet below where medics wait to receive the wounded. You are lowering one after another with a rhythm that is mechanical, automatic, driven by the simple equation that stopping means men die, and you cannot stop, will not stop, not while wounded remain and your strength holds, and the Japanese have not yet found you in the darkness. Your hands bleed from the rope friction, the skin torn away until you can feel the fibers cutting into raw flesh with each lowering, each retrieval. But pain is distant, abstract, less important than the next casualty who needs reaching, the next man who will die if you do not find him in the next few minutes before blood loss or exposure or Japanese soldiers finish what American artillery started. You pray while you work, not formal prayers, but a running conversation with God that sounds more like negotiation than worship, asking for strength to reach the next man, asking for invisibility from the Japanese patrols you can hear moving closer, asking for the rope to hold and your arms not to fail, and the wounded to survive the descent because some of them are unconscious, some are delirious with pain, some cannot hold on and must be tied to the rope and lowered like cargo, while you trust that soldiers below will catch them, will untie them, and send the rope back up for the next rescue. The system is crude, improvised, violates every medical protocol about spinal injuries and fracture management, but the alternative is leaving them to die or be killed, and that is not acceptable, cannot be acceptable, not while you can still move. You find men in impossible places, trapped under debris with legs crushed, hiding in shell craters with abdominal wounds that are mortal without immediate surgery, unconscious in exposed positions where Japanese patrols will discover them within minutes. You drag them to the cliff edge with strength that should not exist in your frame, hauling soldiers who outweigh you by 50 pounds across ground torn by explosions, through mud mixed with blood, around bodies of men you could not reach in time or who were already dead when you found them. Some of the wounded try to tell you to leave them, to save yourself, to stop taking risks for men who might not survive anyway. You ignore them. This is not about odds or rational calculation. This is about the absolute conviction that every life has value, that abandoning wounded violates everything you believe about human dignity and moral obligation, that your faith means nothing if it cannot sustain you through this, if it cannot provide the strength to do what needs doing, regardless of cost. The Japanese are close enough now that you can hear voices, can distinguish the sound of their boots on rock from the ambient noise of distant artillery and small arms fire. You freeze in shadow, a wounded soldier draped across your shoulders, both of you absolutely still, while a patrol passes within 20 feet, their flashlights sweeping across the plateau, searching for American survivors to kill or capture. The wounded man's breathing is ragged, too loud, and you press your hand gently over his mouth to muffle the sound, willing him to understand that silence means survival, that the next 30 seconds determine whether you both live or die. The patrol moves past. You wait until the footsteps fade, then continue to the cliff edge, lower the soldier, return into the darkness for another. And then there are no more wounded within reach. Either you have found them all, or the ones remaining are too deep in Japanese-controlled territory to reach, too far from the cliff edge to recover before being killed. You make one final sweep, crawling through the plateau, searching for anyone missed, anyone still alive who can be saved. You find only bodies, dozens of them, men you could not reach in time, men who died while you were lowering others, men whose deaths you will carry forever as evidence of limitation, of the impossibility of saving everyone, no matter how strong your conviction or how desperate your effort. You descend the cliff for the last time. Your hands cannot grip the rope properly, cannot control the descent, and you half fall the final 100 feet, landing hard enough to knock the breath from your lungs, to send pain shooting through your back and shoulders. Medics rush to help you, but you wave them off, stumbling toward the aid station where the men you rescued are being treated, needing to see them alive, needing confirmation that the night meant something, that the work was worthwhile. 75 men. That is the count when someone finally tallies the rescued. 75 soldiers lowered from Maeda Escarpment in one night by a medic who refused to carry a weapon, who was supposed to be a liability, who his unit believed would run when the fighting started. The aftermath is strange, disorienting, harder to process than the rescue itself, because during the rescue there was only action, only the clarity of immediate necessity. But now there is time to think, and feeling returns, and your body begins sending signals that you ignored all night, the hands destroyed by rope friction, the muscles torn from hauling men twice your weight, the dehydration and exhaustion, and the psychological weight of having spent hours surrounded by dying men while Japanese soldiers hunted you in the darkness. You collapse at the aid station, not from wounds, but from simple depletion, from having pushed beyond every reasonable limit, and finally reaching the point where your body refuses to continue, regardless of what your will demands. They carry you to a hospital tent, where doctors examine your hands with expressions that shift from clinical assessment to something approaching awe. The rope burns have stripped skin down to raw tissue, have damaged tendons and nerves in ways that will require months of healing, might result in permanent loss of dexterity. "How did you hold on?" one doctor asked, not rhetorically, but genuinely confused about how flesh this damaged could maintain grip strength sufficient to lower 75 men. You have no answer that makes medical sense, can only say that you held on because letting go meant men died, because the rope was the only connection between wounded soldiers and survival, because your faith promised that God would provide strength equal to the task if the task was righteous. Your unit's attitude transforms overnight. The soldiers who mocked you, who called you coward, who promised they would not risk themselves to save you, they come to the hospital tent one by one, some to apologize, some simply to shake your undamaged arm or touch your shoulder, some unable to speak, because what you did defies the categories they use to understand combat and courage. The captain who tried to have you court-martialed for refusing to carry a weapon visits and stands beside your cot for a long moment before saying quietly, "I was wrong about you. We were all wrong." You want to tell him that you were not trying to prove anything, that the rescue was not about vindicating your beliefs or demonstrating courage, but simply about doing what needed doing because wounded men required help and you were there and capable. But the words feel inadequate, sound self-righteous when spoken aloud, so you simply nod and accept his acknowledgement. The battle for Okinawa continues for weeks after Maeda Escarpment,
grinding forward with the same brutal arithmetic of yards gained and casualties sustained. You return to duty as soon as your hands heal enough to function, refusing evacuation to rear area hospitals because your unit is still fighting and wounded still need medics, and staying safe while others face danger contradicts everything you believe about service and obligation. You participate in additional assaults, treat hundreds more casualties, continue working unarmed through combat that claims thousands of American lives before the island is finally secured in late June. On May 21st, 3 weeks after the Maeda rescue, you are treating a wounded soldier when a grenade lands near your position. You throw yourself over the casualty to shield him from the blast, take shrapnel in your legs and lower back, injuries severe enough to finally force evacuation off the island. You are conscious during the transport to hospital ship, conscious enough to ask repeatedly about the soldier you were treating, needing confirmation that he survived, that your decision to shield him rather than dive for cover was worthwhile. They tell you he lived. The answer provides comfort that analgesics cannot, allows you to accept the evacuation, knowing the injury at least accomplished something, protected one more life. The recovery is long, complicated by infection and the difficulty of removing shrapnel embedded near your spine. You spend months in military hospitals, undergoing surgeries and physical therapy, learning to walk properly again, working through the rehabilitation that transforms acute trauma into chronic condition you will manage for the rest of your life. Other wounded soldiers in the hospital know who you are. The story of Maeda escarpment has spread through the military network, has been featured in newspapers, has become the kind of legend that sustains morale, that proves heroism exists even in the industrialized slaughter of modern warfare. The Medal of Honor is awarded on October 12, 1945, 3 weeks after Japan's formal surrender, presented by President Truman in a ceremony at the White House. You are the first conscientious objector to receive the nation's highest military decoration, and the symbolism is not lost on anyone. The medal traditionally recognizes killing done with exceptional courage, but yours recognizes saving done with exceptional courage, acknowledging that refusing to kill while still serving in combat requires a different kind of bravery than the conventional warrior ethos celebrates.
But the attention is uncomfortable. Feels like it misses something essential about what happened on Maeda escarpment. The newspapers call you hero. The public treats you as symbol of faith and courage. The military holds you up as evidence that conscientious objectors can serve honorably. All of this is fine, is perhaps even true in some limited sense, but it reduces the night on the plateau to narrative, to lesson, to story that can be told in simple terms about one man's extraordinary courage. What gets lost in that reduction is the complexity, the terror you felt, the moments when you wanted to descend the cliff and save yourself, the wounded you could not reach and who died while you were rescuing others, the moral ambiguity of serving in a war you believed was necessary while refusing to participate in the killing that war required. You returned to Virginia after discharge, marry Dorothy Shute, who waited for you through the war years, build a quiet life that has nothing to do with medals or heroism or the plateau at Okinawa. You work as carpenter, raise a family, attend church regularly, try to be the same person you were before the war transformed you into symbol. The nightmares come occasionally, not every night, but often enough to disrupt sleep, often enough that Dorothy learns to wake you gently when she hears you calling for medic or crying out in Japanese-accented English that recreates the voices of wounded men you could not save. The nightmares feature the ones you missed,
the soldiers who died while you were lowering others, the bodies you found too late. The 75 you saved matter, but they do not erase the others, do not resolve the guilt of limitation, the knowledge that even maximum effort was insufficient to save everyone. You speak occasionally at churches and schools, telling the story when asked, but always emphasizing that what happened was not about individual heroism, but about faith providing strength to do what seemed impossible, about conviction sustaining action when rational calculation would have demanded withdrawal. You are careful never to condemn soldiers who killed, never to claim moral superiority over men who carried weapons and used them. They were doing what they believed was right, you tell audiences who want you to condemn warfare. I was doing what I believed was right. Both can be true. Both can be honorable. The important thing is that we each followed our conscience, even when it was difficult, even when it would have been easier to compromise. The decades accumulate their weight slowly, like snow building on branches until the structure beneath becomes invisible under layers of accumulation. You age into your 50s, 60s, 70s, watching the war that defined your youth recede from current events into history, from memory into commemoration, from lived experience into something students study in textbooks that reduce Okinawa to statistics and strategic objectives, that cannot capture what it felt like to crawl across that plateau in darkness, with Japanese soldiers hunting you and wounded men depending entirely on whether your strength held for one more rescue, then another, until either you saved them all or your body finally failed. The recognition continues sporadically. Veterans organizations invite you to speak at anniversary events. Historians interview you for oral history projects documenting the Pacific War. Filmmakers express interest in adapting your story, though you resist this for years because Hollywood's version of heroism seems incompatible with the terrified scrambling that constituted your actual experience on Maeda Escarpment. But eventually you cooperate with a documentary in the 1990s, sitting for interviews that force you to revisit the night in detail, to describe what you felt and thought and feared while the rescue was happening, to confront memories you have spent decades trying to process into something manageable. What emerges in these interviews is complexity the simple hero narrative cannot accommodate. You acknowledge the fear, the moments when you wanted to flee, the calculations about whether saving one more man was worth the risk of being killed or captured. You acknowledge that you prayed for courage not because you possessed it naturally, but because you needed supernatural intervention to continue, needed something beyond your own capacity to sustain effort that exceeded human limitation. I was not brave, you tell interviewers who seem frustrated by this denial of the characteristic they most want to celebrate. I was terrified every second, but I could not leave them. My fear of abandoning wounded men was greater than my fear of dying, and that is not courage, that is just what I could not live with myself if I failed to do. The other Okinawan veterans, the ones you saved, stay in contact over the years. Some write letters, some call on anniversaries, some visit in person to thank you again and again for the life they have lived because you pulled them off that plateau. They have children who would not exist if you had descended the cliff with the rest of the battalion, grandchildren whose existence depends entirely on your decision to stay, to risk everything for men who were not even your friends, who had mocked you and called you coward and promised they would not help you if you were hit. The mathematics of your choice echo forward through generations, creating families and futures that branch out from that single night in incomprehensible complexity. One veteran, a man named Ralph Baker,
who you pulled from under a destroyed pillbox with both legs shattered, makes a pilgrimage to your home every year on May 5th, the anniversary of the rescue. He arrives at your door with his wife and eventually his children and grandchildren, wanting them to meet you, wanting them to understand that their family exists because of what you did, because you refused to abandon him when abandoning would have been rational, would have been what everyone expected from the unarmed medic who was supposed to run when the fighting started. You gave me 70 years I should not have had, he tells you during one of these visits, his voice breaking with emotion that time has not diminished. Every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary Tuesday with my family, all of it is a gift from you.
You are uncomfortable with this level of gratitude. Feel it distorts the reality of what happened into something too simple, too focused on your actions rather than the larger context of war and chance and the arbitrary distribution of survival. I was doing my job, you tell him, the same response you have given for decades. Any medic would have done the same. But Baker shakes his head firmly. No, any medic would have descended with the battalion. Any medic would have followed orders to withdraw. You stayed because you could not do otherwise, because your faith made abandoning wounded impossible, because you valued our lives more than your own safety. That is not just doing a job. That is grace made visible in human action. The phrase stays with you, grace made visible. It captures something you have struggled to articulate about that night, about the way your limitations dissolved in the face of necessity, about the strength that came from somewhere beyond your own capacity. You were not Superman, not warrior, not anything except a terrified young man with destroyed hands and failing strength who kept moving because stopping meant men died, and you could not accept that, could not reconcile it with belief in the sacred value of human life that had governed every decision you made since childhood. In 2004, a film is finally made, The Conscientious Objector, a documentary that presents your story with complexity you appreciate, that does not shy away from the mockery you endured, or the fear you felt, or the moral difficulty of serving in a war while refusing to participate in its violence. The film introduces you to new generations who did not live through World War II, who know the Pacific War only as historical abstraction, who need reminding that the categories of hero and coward, warrior and pacifist, courage and conviction are more complicated than simple narratives acknowledge. But even this film cannot fully capture it, cannot convey the texture of that night, the smell of blood and cordite, the sound of wounded men crying for help, the feeling of rope cutting into destroyed flesh while you lowered another casualty and wondered if this would be the one where your hands finally failed, where grip strength became insufficient and a man fell 400 feet to his death because your body could not sustain what your will demanded, cannot convey the spiritual dimension, the sense that you were not alone on that plateau, that something larger than yourself was working through you, providing strength that should not have existed in your frame, protecting you from bullets that should have found you, sustaining effort that exceeded human capacity by any reasonable measure. You die on March 23, 2006, at age 87, having outlived most of the men you saved, having survived into an era where conscientious objectors are better understood, where military service accommodates moral conviction in ways it could not in 1942. The funeral is attended by hundreds, veterans you served with, soldiers you saved, family members whose existence traces directly to your actions on Maeda Escarpment, people who knew you only through the story, but felt it important to honor what you represented. President George W. Bush issues a statement praising your courage and faith, calling you exemplar of American values at their best, evidence that conviction and service are not contradictory but complementary, that refusing to kill while still saving lives represents the highest form of moral courage. The grave at Chattanooga National Cemetery becomes a pilgrimage site, visited by veterans and conscientious objectors and people struggling with the question of how to serve their conscience while honoring obligations to country and community. They come seeking evidence that the contradiction can be resolved, that refusing to compromise core beliefs does not require abandoning service, that courage exists in forms the warrior culture does not typically celebrate. They leave flowers and medals and handwritten notes thanking you for proving that strength comes in many forms, that the refusal to kill while still facing death requires bravery equal to any conventional combat heroism. Your legacy extends beyond the 75 men you saved, beyond even the families those men created, into the realm of moral example that challenges assumptions about what service requires, what courage looks like, what faith demands when faith confronts the machinery of modern warfare. Military medical training now includes your story as case study in commitment to saving lives, in the lengths a dedicated medic will go to reach wounded soldiers, in the way conviction can provide strength that exceeds physical capacity when the cause is righteous and the need is desperate. The conscientious objectors who serve today, the medics and engineers and support personnel who refuse combat roles but still deploy to war zones, carry your example as proof that their choice is honored, that the military has learned to accommodate moral conviction that once would have resulted in court-martial and discharge. They face less mockery than you did, encounter fewer commanders who equate refusal to carry weapons with cowardice, benefit from decades of cultural evolution that recognizes serving without killing as legitimate expression of patriotism and duty. But the essential question remains unresolved, perhaps unresolvable. Can individual acts of mercy redeem participation in war? Does saving 75 men balance whatever contribution your service made to the overall war effort, whatever role you played in enabling the violence, even while refusing to participate directly in killing? You wrestled with this question your entire life, never arriving at a comfortable answer, never achieving the certainty that would allow you to look back on Okinawa without complexity, without the knowledge that you served a just cause through means you believed were righteous, but in context of industrial slaughter that killed hundreds of thousands and devastated an entire island. What you left behind is not simple heroism, but complicated testimony about the possibility of maintaining moral conviction in circumstances designed to make such maintenance impossible, about the cost of that conviction and whether the cost was worthwhile, about whether one night of extraordinary courage validates a lifetime of faith or simply proves that even the deepest beliefs are tested by war in ways that expose their limitations and their surprising strength simultaneously. The plateau at Okinawa has been reclaimed by vegetation now, the scars of battle covered by decades of growth,
The cliff you climbed and descended repeatedly through that long night, now a tourist site where Japanese and American visitors walk peacefully, taking photographs and reading historical markers that describe the battle in sanitized language that cannot capture what it felt like to be there, to fight there, to die there, or barely survive and carry the weight of that survival forward through decades that transformed the event from lived experience into memory, into history, into legend. But sometimes, in the right light, if you know what you are looking for, you can see the traces, the depression where the rope system was anchored, the path worn by repeated crossings carrying wounded men, the places where the rock was scorched by explosions or scarred by bullet impacts. The physical evidence fades slowly, but the story endures because people need proof that goodness persists even in circumstances designed to extinguish it, that individual human beings can choose mercy over self-preservation and survive to testify about what that choice required, what it cost, what it preserved. Your hands never fully recovered. The nerve damage and tendon scarring left them stiff, limited in dexterity, requiring conscious effort to perform tasks that should have been automatic. You used them anyway, worked as a carpenter despite the difficulty, refused to treat the injury as a disability that exempted you from normal labor. The scars were visible reminder of the night everything changed, the night you became someone different than the mocked conscientious objector who his unit expected to fail when the real fighting started. But you never displayed the hands as proof of sacrifice, never used the injury to claim special status or demand recognition. They were simply the cost of doing what needed doing, the physical price of conviction translated into action. And in the end, that is what matters most, not the medal or the recognition or the way your story has been told and retold and transformed into inspiration and example, but the simple fact that when wounded men needed help and helping them meant risking everything, you helped. You did not calculate odds or weigh personal safety against probable outcomes. You did not compromise your beliefs to make service easier or acceptance more immediate. You simply climbed that cliff unarmed, treated casualties while bullets cracked overhead, lowered 75 men to safety one by one through a night that should have killed you a dozen times but somehow did not, and then returned to ordinary life, carrying the knowledge that faith was sufficient, that conviction sustained you, that the choice to serve without killing was vindicated by the lives you saved, even if vindication came at a cost your hands still bear 70 decades later. This is the testimony that survives you. This is the evidence that endures when memory fades and witnesses die and the war itself recedes into the distant past that new generations study without fully comprehending. That one man, in one night, on one plateau in Okinawa, proved that courage and conviction are not contradictory, that refusing to kill while still saving lives represents the highest form of moral strength, that sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply doing what you believe is right, even when everyone tells you it is impossible, even when the odds are overwhelming, even when the cost might be everything.